So Marjorie Taylor Greene, the congresswoman from Q, has come out and said that she does not believe in evolution. Right. Where do these people come from? Well, let's find out. Angelo Carusone is the president of Media Matters, the CEO of Media Matters for America. MediaMatters.org is the website. Go Angelo is his Twitter handle, along with MMFA, as in Media Matters for America, on Twitter. MediaMatters.org, of course, on the internet. Angelo, welcome back to the program. You guys are tracking QAnon-supported candidates. Tell me about this.
That's right. So, in 2020, we tracked QAnon candidates at the congressional level, and we found that there were 97 that ran during the primaries. 24 made their way onto the ballot. In November, 2 won their seats. So, this year, because of obviously everything that happened with the attack on the Capitol and then Facebook banning QAnon, and obviously Trump not being restored to office, there's this perception that maybe QAnon's gone or not as much of a concern. And so what we did is we started tracking them again. And what we found is that there are more QAnon candidates at this same point in the 2022 cycle compared to the 2020 cycle than there were in 2020. So there are 19 already that are running at the congressional level. And what's even scarier is when we started to look down, they're winning races at the local level as well. School boards, county elections. I mean, they've actually been increasing their political power since 2020.
On the one hand, you say it's fairly easy, in fact, I think, to think, how can these people believe this weird stuff? Democrats drinking the blood of children and satanic rituals. But on the other hand, how could Republicans have believed back in the 80s that if you radically cut taxes on rich people, it would somehow raise the income of average working people? I mean, weird fantasies, weird political beliefs are not something that is new to the Republican Party. They have been,
right? I mean, that's why they called it voodoo economics appropriately, right?
Yeah, that was George Herbert Walker Bush's. Yeah, or back in the 50s, the idea that the State Department and the Army were filled with communists who were preparing to overthrow the government of the United States, and it was so urgent that Joe McCarthy had to convene, his Senate hearings, and you had the House Un-American Activities Committee. I mean, the Republican Party has spent my entire lifetime. I was born in 1951. I mean, literally my entire lifetime. Chasing ghosts, chasing fantasies, chasing things that aren't real, whether they're chasing them because they're afraid of them in the case of the communists, or whether they're chasing them because it's a new belief system like, trickle-down economics. As horrible and weird and surprising as this seems, in a way, if you put it in that context, it doesn't seem quite so surprising. What I'm looking for is, what do we do about that? And the other question that your comment just a minute ago, Angelo, sparked in me is, you said 2 openly QAnon candidates won in the 2020 cycle. Was that Greene and Boebert?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yep. Lauren Boebert out of Colorado.
And that doesn't even count any of the QAnon adjacent people. I mean, there are plenty of candidates that won that are QAnon adjacent, and we sort of tried to keep it really narrow. So only people that consider themselves to be adherents. So they've espoused the tenets of it. They've helped recruit or advocated that people, become participants in the effort. I mean, it's even when you look at it that narrow slice, it's kind of scary because it does illustrate there's a much larger circle sort of around that. And that's, and I think that also helps explain in part why even that they haven't gone away. And as you point out, it's part of a larger pattern. In fact, the Republicans right now are increasingly organizing power on what most people consider the fringes. And that is right now, that's this QAnon community. And that is, it's a pretty scary thing, because I think what's different now compared to some of the other wacky beliefs they've had is that, one, QAnon stuff is fundamentally linked into the idea of violence. The idea is that these aren't people anymore, they're demons or psychic vampires. 2, that you have to become the storm, especially after Trump didn't get restored to office. One of their new rallying ideas is that they have to sort of take matters into their own hands. They can't wait for the Trump savior. And that's sort of a shift, because it helps show that they're willing to push the envelope a little bit further. And then I think, it gets into what you do about it, because that obviously raises the stakes. But ultimately, one thing that I think Democrats, as a whole, we always struggle with these things is that we let these ideas metastasize. We don't use our own voice enough. And ultimately, they start to pull people into the fold. We dismiss it as ridiculous without really appreciating just how fast and rapidly that it's growing.
Yeah.
One thing I would say is more local support, right? I mean, I think that's where Democrats are clearly losing when it comes to the Q stuff.
With regard to more local support, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, the QAnon people are running for these county board.
They're building They're building from the grassroots up,
right.
which is
exactly
how,
right.
if you want real political power in America, that's how you do it. Is you build from the grassroots up. You start with school boards and town councils and city councils and dog catcher. I mean, and that is what back in 2008. In 2009, this huge campaign that was apparently funded by parts of the Koch network to get Tea Party folks, in quotes, or maybe it was 2010, I guess it was, the Concord something. It wasn't coalition, but it was. I used to play clips from their videos where they talked about run for precinct committee chair in the Republican Party and take over the Republican Party, and sure enough, they did. And so this is just like the latest step in the crazy, step by step by step. Now, the last time that Q has posted anything was in December of last year. And that was right just before this major expose suggesting that the Q was actually an American living in the Philippines as a pig farmer running an internet site. And so, and once he got outed, he went quiet, and nobody's heard from him since. And I'm reading stories that suggest that the whole QAnon movement now is starting to undergo changes. It's splintering. There's a violent faction that is kind of spun off or is merging with groups like the Boogaloo Boys and the 3%. The other groups, the right wing, the traditional in quotes right wing groups that are willing to embrace violence. And then there is another group within QAnon that has spun off that is trying to kind of clean up their act and stop talking about Democrats drinking blood, but still following lots and lots of crazy stuff. Any thoughts on that, on how Q is doing, or are you just looking at the politics of this?
No, I think that what you just said is really important to sort of understand foundationally what is both happening and why it's happening within the QAnon community and movement. Is like, in some ways, it's sort of like during that period of Christianity where there were this hyper schisms during the Protestant Reformation. Anytime they had a disagreement about something, they'd form a new religion, right? And so there was this constant new sects of a religion that were popping up every time they had a small discrepancy or difference. And that's kind of what's happening in the QAnon movement right now. And the comparison there is not just apt in terms of what's the splintering side of it, but it also illustrates that so much of this is based on a belief structure that is doggedly held onto, similar to the way that a religion would be. And that's really what this has become to a lot of individuals. It doesn't really matter anymore that QAnon, that Q isn't posting. It mattered in the early days because that was what was the connective tissue pulling everybody together. Now it's sort of become more of a broad concept and brand for just thinking about this idea that demons and that Democrats and the media are demons in cahoots, running child sex trafficking rings, and cracking down on anybody that's opposing them. And so that's the thing. They are splintering. And the part about it that I would just put a bow on is that a lot of it isn't accidental. One of the things we saw immediately after January 6th were aggressive white nationalist movement and also militants going directly to disaffected Q people and saying, see, you waited too long for somebody else to come in. Here's the actual approach. You should have done it. They sort of saw it as an opportunity to collect new members. And so a lot of what other extremist groups have actually been poaching from the sort of the Q crowd because they're self-organizing, they're deeply active, they participate. And obviously they're motivated because they're hopped up on this pretty terrifying idea.
Yeah, well, and they've got both what we're afraid of and also what we want. And the what we want part seems to me to be basically authoritarianism and oligarchy, that they don't trust democracy, they don't trust the rabble, to use John Adams' phrase. And, you know, they would much rather have a strongman leader. That's why they love Donald Trump. And so I think that you could call this a neo-fascist movement. You know.
Yeah, absolutely could. We've been describing it as a proto-fascist because in a lot of ways it's an essential ingredient.
Yeah, probably better. You're doing God's work, Angelo. Angelo Carusone, the president and CEO of Media Matters for America, MediaMatters.org. Go Angelo on Twitter, or MMFA. Angelo, keep it up. Thanks for the report. It's always great talking with you.
Likewise.
Thank you. Stay in touch. It's we've got such a ways to go if we're going to save this country from insanity.